never christened, never blessed.
To say a ship was unsinkable was flying in the face of God.
When she died, the world mourned her passing.
You can imagine what it was with these women who knew then that their husbands had gone down the ship.
She symbolized an era, and when she passed on, our world would never be the same. She was the Titanic.
Beyond what is known lies an unexplored world of shadows and phantoms. A land that knows no limits of time or space. From the dawn of discovery to the nightfall of catastrophe. Journey to a universe of the unexplained, the unforeseen, the unbelievable. A place where myth and legend are law, superstition a science. A place beyond reality, where no question will go unanswered. Travel to a world of secrets and mysteries.
Time for our journey to begin. The Titanic. We must find out what happened on that night so long ago. And this is our window into the past.
News of the world. Not just big, not just huge, why it's Titanic. Yes, this week in Southampton, England, hurrahs greeted the new pride of the Atlantic, the White Star Line's brand new super ship, the Titanic. Under construction for the last 2 years, this great ship is filled with the best money can buy. And believe us, it bought a lot. Every stateroom is filled with the riches of old Europe, and the Titanic is justifiably called a floating palace. But you need to have the riches of a king to afford a deluxe ticket, because White Star owner Bruce Ismay expects and gets over $5,000 for a one-way ticket. But wait, what have we here? Why, getting on board in Queenstown, Ireland, it's a humble child of the sod, young Lily Goodwin. Well, surely you aren't paying that king's ransom for a ticket. Yes, this young lass is going to America, too. Talk about the luck of the Irish. She and her 5 brothers and sisters can't wait to get aboard this super liner. A true Titanic of a ship. Bigger than the Washington Monument, but a lot more seaworthy. Bon voyage, Titanic. See you in New York.
If only Lily and her family had read this book, perhaps they would have reconsidered taking that voyage. Written 14 years earlier, this novel detailed with astonishing accuracy the maiden voyage of the Titan, a huge passenger liner that struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic, sinking with a great loss of life. In some ways, this prophecy turns the Titanic into a classic tragedy. But the end was ordained before the beginning. Designed to be the last word in luxury, the Titanic was incredible in every way. 880 feet from bow to stern. She left on her maiden voyage on the 10th of April, 1912, and there were many photographs taken upon her departure, including these unique glimpses of the doomed ship and passengers taken by a clergyman who disembarked at the ship's last stop in Ireland. Her captain, E.J. Smith, was considered the finest in all the Atlantic, and this was to have been his last voyage before retirement after an unblemished career. After leaving Ireland, 4 days passed uneventfully. Passengers relaxed and explored the brand new ship. Sunday the 14th was a day of rest, and even Captain Smith took the day off, foregoing his usual inspection of the ship. We know that the Titanic was told of ice ahead, and her wireless room reverberated with incoming warnings. But she ignored those messages and sped toward the ice field at full speed. The lookout cried out a warning, but it was too late. With a horrible grinding, the great ship struck the berg and immediately came to a silent stop. The Titanic had less than 2 hours to live. Captain Smith knew the unthinkable had occurred. His ship was doomed. It was time to abandon her, but with what? There were only enough lifeboats for a third of her passengers, and Smith knew it. Women and children first was the cry, and slowly the evacuation began. The first and second classes were given priority on the lifeboats, and amazingly enough, many of the pitifully few boats left half empty. The end drew near. During this agonizing period, the Titanic frantically called for help. In vain. For even though the lights of 2 other nearby vessels were spotted, no rescue came. Many of the poor immigrants in third class were trapped below, in some cases by gun-wielding crew members. And soon, everyone left on board knew the worst. The Titanic and all aboard her were doomed. The ship's band gathered together on the top deck and played ragtime dance tunes, and then as the water rushed to meet them, hymns. Finally, at 2:20 a.m., she stood on end and vanished. There were only 705 survivors. The events of that Sunday night have become legend. Now we must go back and walk the decks of the Titanic ourselves and meet the men and women who went with her into oblivion. The only voyage of the Titanic was surrounded by bad luck that defies belief. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It was as if she was cursed. A curse, some say, began when she was launched, but not christened. It is now April 12th, 1912. The Titanic has less than 8 hours to live.
I must say, this voyage has exceeded all expectations. And if we keep up this speed, we'll be in New York by Wednesday. It almost seems a shame to arrive so soon.
What an exciting time we've had. If only me Mum would join us. But she won't come out to the cabin. You see, there was folks who got bad feelings and left right before we sailed. Now, Mum's scared. She's thinking the ship could sink. This ship. I hear they have solid gold faucets above decks. Oh, I wish they'd let me just take one look.
If you ask me, this whole trip's been marked. They got a coal fire down below they can't put out. We nearly hit to New York when we left Hampton. Everything is new and not working proper. Oh, yeah, and this is perfect. They didn't give me no binoculars. None of the lookouts have them. Imagine that. What do they want me to do up there? Sleep.
The Titanic hit the iceberg at a speed in excess of 22 knots, and even the angle of collision was unlucky. Had she turned 10 seconds earlier, she would have missed the iceberg entirely. Had she turned 10 seconds later, she would have collided dead-on, a survivable catastrophe. But she struck in the worst imaginable fashion, in such a way that 6 bulkheads burst, dooming 1,500 innocent people.
I warned them. Just as soon as I seen it, I swear I did. But there was no waves, so the berg had no water line. And it must have just turned over because it was dark blue. And there weren't no moon. Everything was pitch black. Nobody could have seen it in time. Nobody.
Well, of course I didn't get into the lifeboat ahead of any women and children. Everything was moving as smoothly as could be expected. Why, Wallace and his band were playing, keeping spirits high and dry. Everybody waited their turn. There was absolutely no panic.
We saw the lifeboats going down into the water, and they won't tell us why. And they won't let us upstairs. Dad and Mikey went to go see what they could do, but they haven't come back yet. Should we keep waiting? We don't know what to do.
It was horrible. Bloody awful. This one gent jumped off the bridge and landed smack on some deck chairs. Poor blighter never had a chance.
She was all lit up, and even though our boat had moved some distance away, she was magnificent. You could see the lights still on underwater.
There was water. Freezing water up to our ankles. We tried to climb upstairs, but then the water came spilling down. It was coming at us from above and below.
She pointed straight up in the air. The boilers came loose with a terrible roar.
Me, I was in boat 6. And all around us in the water. I never heard such awful sounds. Screams, prayers, and choking. It took a long time for some of them to be still.
I don't remember much else, really. It just got so cold. So cold.
Lily Goodwin and 1,522 others perished that night, and a few wished they had. Bruce Ismay died in disgrace 25 years later, under a cloud of suspicion, because he had lived while so many had died. Frederick Fleet took his own life almost 50 years later, perhaps the last victim of that April night. But some did live. A handful of those survivors are alive today, and they remember what it was like on that terrible night. They were little girls then. They were on the Titanic that night, and they lived to remember.
Well, my mother had a premonition, and she never went to bed in that ship at night at all. She sat up every night.
And he says, Madam, you don't have to be afraid of anything. He says, you know that the Titanic has watertight compartments.
And the only thing that she felt strongly about was that she said that to say that the ship was unsinkable, which indeed was what was claimed, to say a ship was unsinkable was flying in the face of God.
The Titanic was going very fast, and the vibration was terrible. What woke us up was the stopping of the ship.
And my mother didn't say, well, I told you something was going to happen. She said nothing at all. She just stood there.
He went up and he came back. He said, it's nothing much. They only struck an iceberg.
I think I probably was the last one to get in because they lowered the boat right away.
So as they proceeded to lower the lifeboat, my father put my mother and I in and made absolutely no attempt to get in himself.
But after we got in the lifeboat, he says, I'll see you in New York. Never saw him again. He went down with the boat.
I'll never forget the terrible noise that ship made when it was drawn down. Human beings screaming and the rush of water. It was terrible.
The sounds of people drowning are something that I cannot describe to you, and neither can anyone else. It's the most dreadful sound. And there's a terrible silence that follows it. When the ship was no longer there, the lights had all gone, and the dark night was round us, and all these dreadful noises had gone. I was only 7, but I remember thinking that everything in the world was standing still.
The Titanic still exists. In some ways, her story has not yet ended. Let's journey to her final resting place, 12,000 feet below the North Atlantic. It is strangely peaceful where she lies. A rust-encrusted tomb that remained hidden until its discovery in the fall of 1985 in an expedition led by a scientist named Robert Ballard.
All throughout the Titanic expedition, there were 2 individuals. There was the professional and there was the human. And in most cases, the professional was very busy and the human just had to sit and wait. But then there were moments, seeing it for the first time through the porthole of the submarine, or landing on the deck for the first time, or all the different firsts that happened. The human would come through whenever you gave it a chance. And certain images, empty lifeboat davit, the doll's head, chandelier, going down the grand staircase, that was my dream. That was my focus for so many years. I wanted to go inside. I not only wanted to find the Titanic, but I always wanted to go inside of it. And the landing Alvin on the entrance to the grand staircase above the elevator shaft, and then sending JJ down deep inside, and then moving into that room and then spotting that chandelier, that was the culmination of, if there was any one thing I did, that really was what it was all about.
The Titanic has inspired men and women who, today, keep her memory alive. Men and women who gather together to celebrate her life and commemorate her death. The Titanic has captured the imagination of the world. In 1912, this sinking was one of the first media events, and anyone connected with the tragedy was newsworthy. Today, little has changed, and Titanic survivors and people fascinated with the subject gather together at conventions like this.
I think the basic story of the Titanic itself is inherently fascinating. It reads like a Greek drama. The Titanic's passengers are themselves a very interesting group of people. We have everything from 11 millionaires to the humblest immigrant. And within that range of people, you have very often someone that you particularly relate to, and you tend to see the disaster through these people's eyes. What is essentially going on here at our convention is a sharing of information. Titanic Society members, each of them do individual research, and both through the Society's journal and also through meetings such as this, they can share the results of their research with one another.
Pieces of this great ship can be found inside maritime museums. Artifacts that remind us of what life was like on her one and only voyage. When the great ship went down, the North Atlantic was covered in debris, and some was picked up. Other, more personal items were taken from the ship by passengers who disembarked before she left Ireland, or taken from the White Star offices in London. Now on display, you can find everything from surviving deck chairs to Mrs. Astor's life jacket to an actual piece of the Titanic's plush carpeting taken as a memento by one of the men who installed it. In one such museum, located below decks on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California, this huge model of the Titanic can be found as if headed towards its fatal rendezvous. The memory of this great ship and the men and women who walked upon her decks will surely live on for as long as we travel the oceans. The Titanic was overwhelmed by her tragic destiny and a few seconds of disastrous luck. Titanic. May she rest in peace.
Secrets and Mysteries presents information based in part on theories and opinions, some of which are controversial.